Let me tell you a little bit about Fred Kent. Fred's an interesting guy. He's a man with a collection of 500,000 photographs. And they are photographs of public places from all over the world. He probably has the best collection. And it also makes him the most knowledgeable person about public places, literally all over the world. He travels 150,000 miles a year to about 12 countries, I believe, a year, looking at places. Besides the fact that he's giving lectures, whenever he comes to a city, it's just like today we had him in San Diego and we were showing him around, and he has his camera in one hand and he constantly takes pictures. Fred got his original inspiration after graduating from Columbia University by working under a little-known anthropologist named Margaret Mead. And she really inspired him to take a look at places and people and things in a different context. And it set him on a life trek, and he has taken in all of these things. He is known as a great observer and a great looker of things, and then he is able to talk about it and articulate it and share it with other people. And in doing that, he has really helped transform many places across the country and influence the thinking of many cities. So without much further ado, I would like to bring up our speaker, Mr. Fred Kent.
So that was a nice introduction. Usually people read off this thing, and I don't want to go strangle them because it's not really personal. But that was great, George. Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here. It's such a pleasure to be in San Diego. I have to tell you that I think 75 years ago, my grandmother started coming out here. And she came out here every winter from Connecticut. And then my parents started coming out, and of course I came out occasionally. So it was sort of like a winter home or a secondary home. So I'm going to come out more because now that I spent today with wonderful people in the downtown, exploring the downtown and having them show what is going on, your city is going to become an incredible city. It's really on an amazing path, and for such a long time it was really having a hard time. And then the waterfront, that is going to be a world-class treasure. It's not there yet, but you can see the beginnings of that, and how that plays out is absolutely critical. And with the authority owning 5,000 acres, some of it in the water, I don't know how you say that you own water, but at least half of that is along the waterfront. And so how that plays out is going to define your city. And there's a lot of real opportunities and a lot of mistakes that have been made. So that's a real concern. So what I'm going to do is I am going to, I don't want to use the word long, but it's a lot of different segments. So I'm going to talk about background. I'm going to talk about convergence, because I think that the values of people in communities are changing fairly rapidly, and there's a much broader, deeper demand on the part of people in communities to a different kind of an environment that they live in than they currently live in. And I think they're looking for something very different. And we see that, I think, played out all over as I wander around North America, which I've been doing a lot recently. Transportation has to be totally reformed in order to do that. And I don't get a sense that you're doing that, so I'm going to pick that out fairly carefully and directly. And then I'm going to talk about what is a place and placemaking, and what are the opportunities for placemaking. Because what we say is that when you focus on place, you do everything different. And there's a kind of a paradigm shift that can occur by focusing on places rather than focusing on, say, developments, or focusing on a particular kind of, just on transportation. If you focus on a street and you say, we want to create 10 places on the street, that'll redefine that street. But if you just do streetscape, that might make the street look nicer, but you haven't focused on that street as a series of destinations or a series of great places. And then I'm going to talk about the obstacles to creating a place, which are they're traffic engineers. And then we'll do the streets as public spaces, which is really what's happened is streets have become traffic spaces instead of public spaces, and we need to return them back to public spaces. And that's a big shift, and it requires a very different set of skills than are currently being applied by the traffic engineers. And then suburbs of the future, all over North America, and there's a real shift in the way we view suburbs, and I'll spend just a little bit of time on that. And then creating the central square, everyone seems to want to get back to that central gathering place, that central square, and we're working on them all over the world, and all over Eastern Europe, all over North America, and it's very exciting. And then I want to talk about sex, because that is really great places are a lot about sex in a way, and you'll see that. And then I want to reveal to you the world's greatest public space. So you will be, I hope you're all just sitting on pins and needles waiting for that to happen, and then making it happen. So that's the gist of this. And each segment has, I'm going to deal in each of those segments, get to the point, and then move on to the next one. So it's a kind of an overview in many ways of the whole idea of placemaking. So we have programs in all these areas. We have a major market program. We give away about $1,500,000 a year from foundations for expanding, creating, supporting networks of markets all over the United States and Canada. We actually are going to be funding some markets up in Canada. We work on markets all over the world. The last one was up in Moscow, Central Market in Moscow, but there are many others. We work on parks and plazas and civic squares, and what's happened is, it's really interesting, is that people are demanding, this is actually Laguna Beach right here, are demanding much more activity in public spaces. The whole idea of open space is something that, especially in the suburbs, they have no public spaces in most of the suburbs. So they want them. They've preserved open space, but they haven't created the gathering places that people want. And so there's a big movement towards the usability of public spaces. And we're just coming out of this era where we were designing public spaces to look at but not to touch, out of fear of undesirable activity. And the design disciplines haven't caught on to that yet very well. And they're creating these design statements which aren't about public use. So we have there's a big challenge there, and we get into very difficult dialogue sometimes with some of the design community. And then public buildings and civic design, that has been lacking, especially because of the terrorist thing and the whole emphasis on fear, and how that, it's really a very disturbing trend, because rather than thinking about creating plazas that keep you away from buildings and creating great public spaces, they think more about putting barriers to keep you away from the buildings. And so there's this, we've got to get beyond that idea of fear and get to the idea of creating buildings as great central places rather than finding ways to keep people from getting to them. And then transportation, as I mentioned before, is really the opportunity for fundamental change in every community, is to rethink the way transportation defines our cities. So, and I used to work with this man, Holly White, for about 30 years, but he wrote The Organization Man in 1956, and then The Exploding Metropolis. So he was really about new urbanism back then in The Last Landscape. And then he turned his attention to cities in 1969, and that's when I started working with him. And he wrote The Social Life of Small Urban Spaces. And then he also worked with Jane Jacobs. So, and then Margaret Mead was another person. So I had this amazing way of learning how to deal with the world back then, and it was quite an experience. So we've worked all over the world, and it keeps expanding almost exponentially, this whole interest in placemaking. And Canada has been a big, the Canadians are very different than Americans. They really are. It's really quite remarkable. And learning about them all across Canada, and how they see things. I think they actually have a better sense of responsibility about their communities than we do in the United States. It's quite interesting and a little bit disturbing about this country to get that. So the whole earth is in jail, and we're plotting this incredible jailbreak. That is really what is going on. And I've been using this for a while, but I keep realizing that it's getting more and more. In fact, we were working up in the city of Mississauga in Canada, and we put this up, and then a week later, they called and said, everyone wants to get out of jail, but the door's too small. Because we had trained 100 people in the city government in Mississauga, and they all wanted to get out of jail. So it's a really universal thing. But here's the thing that I'm really fascinated by, and the people that we're here with tomorrow all have some experience in this. And so I wanted to put this up, and there's a kind of community goals are really expanding and broadening. There's a real openness to far more issues that then relate back to how we design and lay out and support our communities. And the idea of place is really kind of the nexus of people who are interested in public health and obesity, about environment, about sustainable agriculture, about transportation, preservation, livability, smart growth, local economies, civic engagement. Those are all issues that many people are now getting more and more interested in, and they realize that there's a connection between all of these. So it's not like everything is focused on place or cities, it's just there seems to be a rising kind of tide of interest in all of these, and they're kind of looking for answers and a direction. So I think that's why a lot of you are involved in these issues, and I think that's why a lot of other people may not realize they're involved in them, but sense them more fully than they have. So it's hard to create a place that will not attract people. What is remarkable is how often it's been accomplished. What we have done is we've created all these look at me kind of places. We do a development and we assume it's done and we walk away from it. And this is in Boston, and then this is in Prague, and this is the one that's a great destination, and you go there at least 2 or 3 times a day if you're anywhere around here, or if you come to the city you have to end up there. But there's no reason to go to that City Hall Plaza in Boston because there's nothing to do there. And that picture was taken in 1975, and I was there last week, and you could take the same picture. And the trees haven't even grown because they're in pots that restrict their growth, so that isn't even changed. So nothing has changed there. And then, we shape our public spaces, and afterwards our public spaces shape us. This building here was designed by Philip Johnson, and that's a human being down there. You see that little thing? And you see the door, it's a little bigger than that person. And the car, that's heavy traffic in Houston. And the president of the bank, it's a Bank America, doesn't like this building. He says, I'm a retail banker, and I need customers. And he says the only people who like this building are the architects and the interior designers. And we say between the traffic engineer and the architect, they've created an almost pedestrian-free environment. So, but here, this is in Paris, and I go to Paris 2 or 3 times a year, and I go there 4 or 5 times a year because it is one of the great streets of the world, and it's been a market for 300 years, or street market, and everything goes on there, and you can go there 100 times and see 100 different things every time because there's so much going on. But we don't create those. We don't allow those to happen. But these are what we seem to be creating. Although I have to say that San Diego seems to have gotten out of that, and a lot of the new buildings in the downtown are actually pretty friendly buildings. And it's pretty nice to see that in a city. Usually the cities we go to, the last building is the worst building in the city. And that's not a very healthy thing to have. So I would say that you're on an upswing here, and I think you should be very proud of where you are. This is down in, you know where that is, in Laguna Beach. Remarkable place, absolutely remarkable, busy all the time, day and night, great gathering place, many, many things to do. This is in Paris, in a park, and there's very little to do there. And once you've seen the bicycle, buried bicycle, you've seen it. So what do you go back? There's no reason to go back there. So what you need are many, many things to do, and you come and do one thing and you find yourself doing 2 or 3 other things. So that idea of place instead of just creating design statements is really a fundamental difference. And when you get art like this on the left, which I've been there 3 times, and I'm still not sure what it is. And if anyone has an idea, I'd love to know. All of you know is you can't land a helicopter there. And after that, it's pretty much. But I do know what that is, and it's really quite a good way to learn about the human body. But these men are in Greenwich Village near our office, and that activity, that lowly, unpurposeful, and random as it may appear, that sidewalk contact are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life grows. But if you're in that building up there, Skidmore, Owings, and Merrill did that building in Houston, if you had these 5 men standing around one of those columns, they would be considered undesirables or loitering. And they certainly wouldn't be smiling. So, you design people out of cities and you leave this out, you're making a tragic error because you're not defining the city around people. And then these are 2 Catholic churches, one in Mexico City, Coyoacán, and one up in Arvada. And we were standing on the steps of this one with the pastor, and right here, and he was looking out over his domain. And he said, I'm going to take these 2 houses out and expand my parking lot, which he did. And right behind this is the town. So there's plenty of parking spaces there. And why do you have to have this, which is only used on Sundays, there? And this one in Coyoacán, in the neighborhood of Mexico City, is one of the most active, delightful places I've ever been. And you could spend a whole day there. And do that. But we don't, in this country, we don't appreciate this, that kind of cultural use of gathering places. And I spent a lot of time along the United States border, and I gave a talk a couple of weeks ago in Miami. And with all these Latinos, it was almost probably 75% of the people in the audience were of a Latino culture. And they don't have any gathering places like this in Miami. And they don't know how to get them. So it's a big problem, or a big question, is why don't we bring the kind of places that the cultures that are occupying our country wonderfully, why don't we bring the kind of places that they have in their country to this country and do that? So I'm really naive on this, but I just keep wondering why that. And we're working along the Texas border and in Miami, and coming down here, you kind of wonder, why aren't we doing that? Why do we do this instead of this? So put that on the table. And then this is the Jane Jacobs, her quote back in 1954, the erosion of cities by automobiles proceeds as a kind of nibbling. Small nibbles at first, eventually hefty bites. A street is widened here, another is straightened there. A wide avenue is converted to one-way flow, and more land goes into parking. No one step in that process is crucial, but cumulatively the effect is enormous. So that was 1954. And downtown you have mostly one-way streets. And I really question that. I just think that there needs to be a real rethinking of the street system, and the streets as public spaces is a really transformative idea. Because what you've done here, and you're not alone, is we've designed our whole region, it's about cars. And when I was in Richmond, Canada 2 weeks ago, I got really depressed. I really did. They showed me the whole town, and we'd asked people what were the 5 best places in town. And the third one were the shopping malls. And the other one was a dike that they had, where it really was just an open space. And they had no place to go except drive around in big cars, living in big houses, and going to shopping malls. It was a pretty sad existence. And I got, it wasn't very pleasant, but I challenged them a lot. So if we get into this situation where we define our cities around cars, this is in Sydney, Australia, and I am happy to admit that those ladies did get across. But at least they had to get together to get across the street. because it was an 800-foot block, and there was no way to cross over to the store. And the Lord Mayor of Sydney came and bought this picture, and he said, I have no way of dealing with the traffic engineers. I answered to a different God. So, transportation is really a discipline unto itself and needs to change. But when we were working up in Belmont Shore, we asked people, sort of by accident, what issues about safety. And traffic issues were up here, pedestrian safety, noise, crime during the day and crime in the evening was here. But the police were dealing with this, but no one was dealing with this. So we've kind of left this part of our world out in terms of exercising our opinions about community life, and we can't do that. And you're doing that here, because I asked questions of people today about that, and they kind of don't answer that. They don't get to that. So there's a real shift. And this is up in Roseville, where right near the largest mall, and to have an advertisement about cars saying that they're getting bigger and scarier than ever, that's not the direction that we want to go in, I don't think. Because one of your favorite writers, I talked to him today, he wrote the book that you all know about. The study of 3 generations of 9-year-olds found that by 1990, the radius around the home that children were allowed to play had sunk into a ninth of what it had been in 1970. That is a crisis. That is a mega crisis. That is a tragedy beyond imagination, and we've got to deal with that. That is a call to arms, as far as I'm concerned, because we're not allowing kids out of our homes. And so that's why we build bigger homes, so that they can now be totally isolated, and then they go to schools that are totally isolated. And what are we doing? So I'll get to that in a minute. So if we design our communities around people, we'll get more people. We design them around children, we'll get children able to walk. I live in Brooklyn, and we live right across the street from an elementary school, and 90% of the kids walk, because we don't allow that kind of traffic, because the streets are very narrow. So what is a place? This is a very intuitive thing, but we look at comfort and image. Does it feel safe, charming, clean, attractive, historic? Uses and activities, are they fun, vital, real, special? Is it access? Is it connected, walkable, convenient, accessible? And the most important one is sociability, neighborly, cooperative, welcoming, storytelling. The outside are measurables, so you can measure a good place very easily from a quantitative point of view, but the real interesting part is the qualitative, because everyone knows those feelings. Intuitively, they know exactly how something works if you ask them, and that's the key. And so a good place, it builds and supports a local economy, it nurtures and defines a community identity, it fosters more meaningful and frequent interaction, draws a more diverse population, promotes public health, and creates improved accessibility. Now, this is a very, very big idea. It's not an intellectual idea, it's an intuitive idea. And it's about, that San Diego, needs 10 major destinations. And each village or town or neighborhood needs 10 places or destinations within it. And then each place or destination needs 10 things to do. And that by triangulating or layering things, and I'll talk about that a little bit, you create synergy. And then by connecting places, you create districts. And then a district needs 100 to 1,000 things to do. So when you think about the places that are important, like Balboa Park, that has a lot of places in it and a lot of wonderful things to do. And so think about others in your neighborhood, or think about others in the region. And what we do sometimes is we ask people to list them, and then we reveal what the list is of what people have said about for a city or for a region. And it's really quite remarkable what people have to say about that. So that might be an exercise that you could do with the Partners for Livable Places, because I think it would be very revealing. So what are those opportunities? And it's amazing. They're all right there, right in front of our noses if we look. And so you could take, and I'll go into a couple of these, the main streets, the local streets, the bus stops, the parks, plazas, squares, libraries, civic buildings, hospitals, schools, and universities. We're now working on 4 universities, and we're not we don't market ourselves for anything. We're working on Stanford, Harvard, Duke, and Ohio State, and that just came out of the blue because they all want gathering places. So it's amazing. And then the cultural institutions and so on. So a bus stop or a train station, you don't have trains really. I mean, you do have some, but this is in New Jersey, and it's the train station's up here, and there's stores all the way around underneath the train station, and it's a great destination. It's an amazing destination. So everyone takes the train because you go there to shop and take the train, or you get the train and you shop before you get on the train or get off. So, but this is something up in Los Angeles where we were working there, and this stick and this really lovely designed wastebasket were what people waited at. Well, and this is where it was right on this area, and this building, this is owned by the Redevelopment Authority, and then the bus stop was put in. But then, look what happened. They opened up the side of the building, and the bus stop is here, and they created a destination right there at the bus stop. And then, that's another look at it. And then Starbucks moved across the street, and they did. So this actually became one of the destinations on that street or in that neighborhood. And so you can see how you triangulate different uses, and you can pull something together to create a really great place. Now, if you really want to attract users, there is this program that really works, and if you want to get better transit ridership, this is a very, very successful program. So we're having this amazing experience in New York. We have a terrible traffic department, and we're surrounding them. It's a pincer movement, and we're going to force them to change like nothing you've ever seen, and it's going to take a lot more work, but we have so many people doing it right now. New York has redefined itself by destinations. Central Park, there are 20 destinations in it that are all remarkable. Rockefeller Center has redefined itself. Bryant Park has redefined itself. Union Square has redefined itself. Washington Square. And now what we're doing is we're looking at Broadway, which could have 10 destinations on it. Here's Union Square, and Herald Square, and Times Square. And these all could become, in a sense, a string of pearls. But what we're talking about is we're talking about creating destinations and then finding ways to connect them. Not doing a road on Broadway with some destinations along it. We're talking about creating destinations and finding ways to connect them. That's a paradigm shift. And we're sort of nudging that in through the governmental structure. And I think it's going to happen. I think it's a very powerful idea. And then this is the whole idea of squares. This is Detroit. And this is the center of Detroit, ground zero. This, right in here, there's a plaque that from here, all the distances are measured. And this is this is the heart. And so what they did for the 300th anniversary is they got us to do a vision for the main square, and then they implemented it. And this is in the wintertime, obviously. And then they brought in CompuWare, put its headquarters buildings there. That's the site. But in the summertime, it's full of activity too. And if you saw the Super Bowl, a lot of activity was centered around this. So it's really redefining Detroit. But I don't really see any central squares in San Diego. I know there's some talk about them, but there's such a fear of who might use it that it hasn't kind of evolved into what it could be. And great squares are very difficult places, so it's a big challenge. Markets are an amazing force, and this is, to me, a very disturbing trend. This is a Home Depot in Mexico City, but in Guadalajara, this is a market where there are probably 200 owners of small businesses, and then right above it is the governmental offices. So that's a pretty good model to follow, and this, which cuts right into a neighborhood, is not a very good model. And I don't like either Home Depot or Walmart or any of those things because of what they do to the communities that they come into. So I won't say any more about that, but these are far more successful as economic generators of small businesses and support, but we don't have that as an answer to those problems in cities because they're not in the kind of mainstream of economic development. But I know that's changing, and I know you're looking at a market here. So the markets that we've looked at and evaluated, we do a whole training program on markets and market development, but it renews downtowns and neighborhoods, brings diverse people together, creates active public space, shapes and growth and minimizes sprawl, promotes public health, provides economic vitality and opportunity. There's no better engine of development for a neighborhood or a downtown than this kind of activity if it's in the right place and it's large enough. And then libraries. This is a story of two libraries. One is in Riverside, which is this one, and that is really an ugly building. I know I hope it didn't get any awards, but it is a great place. And this one in San Antonio is a magnificent building. I personally like it a lot, but it is not a place. It is just a piece of architecture. And the person who did this got the Pritzker Prize. So as you look at it a little more, they certainly didn't talk to the transit agency when they located the bus stop. And here's the bus stop here. And they didn't really think about getting picked up very well, because this is where you sit if you're waiting to be picked up. Whereas on the non-award-winning one, you can have a concert on the front porch. So, and then this is the park in the award-winning one. And we really wondered for a long time what you could do there. And finally someone said, well, you can rake the leaves once a year. So that was the extent of the use of that thing. Whenever you see a bosque of trees, all it means is they don't know what to do. But this was an amazing experience. This is in the Czech Republic. And we were taking a tour of people. We'd done a lot of work in Eastern Europe, and the Czech Republic was a place we'd done a lot of work in sort of restoring towns, activities in towns after the curtain came down, or the wall came down. And we came in, and early one morning, we walked into the town, and you see the sun was just coming up, and we walked down, and I knew that this building was the city hall, and this is a bank, but I didn't really know what this building was. So we went down the street and came back, and then we realized all these sort of teenagers were hanging out in front of it. And that building is the school. It's the high school. Isn't that remarkable? That it's between the city hall and the bank. So what do we do? When you're in there, you're in the high school, what do you do after work? Well, you go work in City Hall or you go work in the bank. What an amazing experience. Why aren't we doing that? Why are we isolating our kids out in the middle of nowhere, unconnected to any of the real activity that the rest of us are engaged in? So, and then the whole mixed-use development is being transformed. And you've done a lot of nice buildings, but you haven't done anything like this. This is the Vancouver School Board. And in the bottom of the building is death by chocolate. So how many people are going to want to not go, when they know that this is here, it's not hard to go to the school board, right? So we've got to get creative about how we mix our uses. So what are the obstacles? Governmental structure. Government is not set up to create places. It absolutely is not. The project focus versus the place focus. The discipline-driven, one-dimensional landscape architects, traffic engineers, planners are all focused very narrowly on their discipline and not on the communities that they're serving. And sort of one-dimensional projects and then fear. So this is the NEPA process. When you're doing a new road, this is what you do. You identify, you already know what the solution is. You come to the community, you identify constraints, you design to avoid constraints, then you evaluate impacts and constraints, get public input. You mitigate damages, you get environmental approvals, get public input, you design, and then the question is, do you build? Well, these are narrow goals, it relies on professionals and experts, community is resistant, results in limited experience of place, static designs, expensive, and crisis-driven. Well, should we really build that? No. So each profession has become its own audience. And that is so true. And when you go, because I give talks at all these disciplines, and they're all focused, how can we do a better road? How can we do a more adventurous design. How could we, do cutting-edge design, all kind of stuff. Instead of, why can't we create place? Why can't we build communities, and why can't we create places? And so the whole idea of place is you identify the stakeholders, define the place, evaluate it, get a vision for it, and the stakeholders of the roles are to advise, suggest, and bring additional resources. The expert now becomes actually much more important because they're now the resource, they facilitate, and they help implement the vision. And they elevate the ideas that a community has. So, and then you can implement it with short-term experiments, long-term vision, and implementation, and then ongoing evaluation. So this empowers communities, attracts partners, professionals become resources, design supports uses, solutions are flexible, engagement and commitment grow. We've trained over 1,000 traffic engineers, and we have given a lot of people a new life because they're now building communities rather than destroying them. What a lousy job is to go in and destroy communities. We're having this in our neighborhood in Brooklyn. They're widening a street, and Tom, you probably know Columbia Street. They're going to ruin a whole neighborhood by widening that street. I mean, it's just like raping your mother, in a way. It is such a tragedy, and we were there Sunday, looking at that. So the street is the river of life, the place where we come together, the pathway to the center. That's the way it used to be, and we've got to get it back. So you can occupy a parking space. That's a kind of a revolutionary idea, because of course it is illegal in most communities for a human being to occupy a parking space. There are approximately 7 parking spaces for every car, and maybe 1 parking space for every 1,000 human beings in a city. So we have our parking space like a bench that we're supposed to use, and cars have their multitude of parking spaces, which of course that's for them, but not for us. So one way is to just get between the cars and have your little lunch. But there's something more fundamental about this, and this is really fascinating, because when I started working, I went out to this street. This is 57th Street to 58th Street in Lexington Avenue, and right there is a bank. And that bank is about 25 feet wide, and right next to that bank is this antique shop. And you can see the way the window is canted a little bit. And so you know that people walking north like this would be more apt to see that window and what was in it, just because of the way it was canted. So I go in here and I talk to the guy and I say, you must be very happy. There are 35,000 people going by your store every day. You must be very happy about your location. And he said, no, I'm not. And I said, why? Because I'm next to a bank. And people start walking faster as they go by the bank. And it takes them 2 or 3 stores to get back into a window shopping rhythm. So you see, there's a whole ergonomic quality to a street. And we don't really understand that. So, this may look like a messy street, but it is a great street in terms of those kinds of qualities. Now we've taken that out of the street by designing the whole building on a block rather than thinking about the ergonomic qualities of the block as you go along it. So we've really lost a lot of the kind of street life by the way we've over-designed our buildings to be more to look at. So creating a great destinations on streets is a major, major issue all over the world. But the real interesting thing, and this is an amazing project that we worked on with the state of New Hampshire Department of Transportation. And I have to tell you that that state DOT is no longer going to build any roads through communities unless they can find a way to make the community work better. And we're doing a training program for all the state DOT transportation officials and the communities. And every town is going to be looked at the way we looked at this. This is a fascinating study. But this town wants to become extraordinary. And they have this as their motto: eat in diners, ride trains, put a porch on the house, shop on Main Street, and live in a walkable community. And this is the town. It's a pretty amazing town. This is the Opera House right here. And it's also the town hall. But it's more important as the Opera House, because that's where all the performances go on in the schools. And you might be going there, it might be a council meeting, but then you have to stop the council meeting because they're going to put on a performance. So that's what's more important. And this is not uncommon in New England. And this is the post office and the courthouse. And this is the Main Street right here. Now, and the Main Street is pretty nice. It's got a lot of good qualities. They take good care of it. They have seating outside. They have their own movie theater. It's owned by someone in the town. So there's no way that anyone would ever come in and put another movie theater there, because this is sacred. So these are the destinations that you might go to in this town. This is the Opera House, the city hall. This is the courthouse and the library right here. And these are various uses. Now this happens to be a dead building in an empty lot. So what happens is that you either go to this part of town or you go to this part of town. And this is not comfortable. So you might actually go here and then drive to here because there's not a good connection. Now what happened here is, this is an earlier aerial photo, but they took out this crosswalk because they wanted to get more traffic through here. And so that kind of took this whole section, and then they put in this suburban bank where they have a drive-through. And so there's a church right here, which is a good destination. So they took out the life of that corner, that intersection right there, okay? Now, so people complain about parking because there's not enough parking here or here. There's lots of parking. You see, it's all over. But this isn't near the destination. So if we connect that, and I'll show you what happens, and then we bring back this, and we go do this, and this is the river right here, and we work on the back area, we can actually create a whole town again, where if you're parked here, you'll walk here, or you'll walk here. Because we don't have to add one parking space to expand parking, because we now changed the whole perception of that town so that it's a complete town instead of cut up into little fragments. And those fragments were cut up because of the traffic engineers or the architect building a building that had no life to it, or they took the ability to cross. So when you ask people what they like to do at a post office, they'd like to have a place to open their mail, hitch up their dog, sit and have coffee, and then this is the community center, and this is the information center, and this woman gets almost everyone going by and gives them information whether they want it or not. But supposing she had a place to have tea and a little garden right here where people could sit, that would add another dimension to that. And then this is fascinating because this is the library, but guess who sits right here? The teens. And the teens intimidate the seniors. So there's this uneasiness between those two cultures, those two ages. And so how do we deal with that? And they've taken the seating out in the downtown because the teens will sit there and the seniors will get uncomfortable about it. So there's not this kind of, it's very interesting, and how to deal with that. So we worked with the teens, and the teens felt that they were ostracized from the downtown. And so there's this whole dialogue that was going on about how to deal with that. And then this building has a lot of uses in it, but you have to go in the door to get to this shop or this food or this health food store. And here's some of the teens. They're really dangerous, very dangerous people. And then this is the busiest place in town. There are 3,000 people a day come to get cigarettes there. And this is where all the presidential candidates stay when they go to try to get votes every 4 years. So here's that little stretch from here to here, okay? So we're going to just look at it, and we'll show you what can happen there. Is if you put the place to sit and have coffee, you expand it, this area here, you put different entranceways here, you have an outdoor eating there, and what they want to do is expand the library by having you come in underneath and go underground because the library is too small, and then fix that up. So you can see how you can add a little bit of improvement to each little block. And cumulatively, that really has a big impact. Now, the benefits of a boulevard. You really need a whole strategy around boulevards because you just have heavily trafficked streets that are not boulevards. And so they can be, as a civic element, they can be make pedestrian movement much easier. They can reduce the negative impact on surrounding communities. And you can do sort of the wide sidewalk boulevard, which can be quite transformative. And these are some of the examples. In Boston and London, they have some wonderful ones where you really have wide sidewalks that are really very comfortable to be on, and the car is sort of not the primary focus of that. You could have the center median one. I don't know that you have any. You have some like Broadway. I don't know that you do that, but you know, this is in Barcelona, La Rambla, which is one of the most amazing streets in the world. You have the center medians, other examples of that in other parts of the world. And then you have and this is actually out on, what's the island out there? Catalina. Yeah, Catalina Island, right. And these are some of the others. In Berlin, this is the main shopping street with a center island as well. And then Barcelona has these are with side access roads. And then this is in Dusseldorf, and it's really a remarkable example of defining a street as a public space. Look at the two lanes, look at how the distance is and how tight the parking is. And what happens there is they actually take out parking spaces and put in independent cafes, which is the same thing here. And then, and what do you do when you're out there on that street? You're watching people. So do you have those kinds of places? And they're not that hard to do. So you could transform many of the downtown streets quite easily if you had a thoughtful traffic department. And then you can do the side access roads, and this along the waterfront, if you have two lanes going each way in the middle and a side access road with parking on it, you could dramatically change the whole perception of the highway along the waterfront from what it is to something far more interesting and engaging for people. And we do that in Brooklyn. We have the Eastern Parkway, which is really a wonderful parkway with a side access road where you go slow, and the median here, the middle area is where you can walk very comfortably, and then most of the traffic moves there. And then in Barcelona they have done that, and they've really created some of the greatest boulevards. So shifting over to suburban redevelopment is another major opportunity. And in Montgomery County, they're changing the whole structure of government, and they're focusing on revitalizing centers, reshaping boulevards, and creating great public spaces. So that's the focus in the suburban area for the future of that whole area. And these are the main streets, but they're going to turn them into boulevards, and they're going to create centers all along there. There's 112 shopping centers that aren't performing very well, and so those are going to become the new town centers with mixed-use development, residential and commercial. And this is the way it looks like today. And what they want to do is create tremendous agricultural reserve, the centers, the boulevards, and then create great places. So that's their whole new paradigm that they've moved to, away from just doing development strategies to creating centers. And it's a big shift. It's an amazing shift, and that's what a lot of people are doing. And then I showed you that before, but that's the picture I wanted to show you, is in the summertime. It's just a great place. Now, this is the squares, and then we're going to move into some conclusion. But the square is the future of every city. And you need often more than one, maybe two or three. And in San Diego, I don't think, and in the neighborhood you need them. This is Pioneer Courthouse Square in Portland, Oregon, and it defines that city. If you go to Portland, you go to this square without any question. And it is a great development. It has been transformed by transit, which comes in there and stops right on the square. And there are all these activities going on, games and performances. They partner with the zoo. Can you imagine doing that? You can't. But they have flower shows. They think they're the center of the earth. And I don't know if San Diego's on there. Yeah, right there, I think. Right there. And they have Italian festivals. They have first nights. And it's just a fantastic place, heavily managed. So what are the qualities of great parks or great squares? And I'll go through each one of these a little bit, but the transit, the inner park, the outer park, attractions and destinations, identity, flexibility, amenities, management, seasonal strategies, diverse funding sources, and it needs to reach out like an octopus. So having the attractions and destinations totally transforms those, defines those places. The identity, the image of it does it. The flexibility in design, you know, being able to have a movie, or in the next morning you might have a tennis match there. The amenities are absolutely fundamental for that. The management that has to be there, it's not security and maintenance, it's programming management and design management, the seasonal strategies that can go on, the diverse funding source to be able to do those kinds of activities. You need supplemental funds to do that. Traffic, transit, and the pedestrian are absolutely fundamental to it. The inner and the outer, you know, this is the greatest square in the world in Siena, and there are all these edge uses on it. And then it needs to reach out like an octopus. This is Union Square, New York, which was a park, and then they put a market up here and another market down here. And then it started to add all these businesses around it. And so it's become a great district, right? Not just a destination. So as I begin to wind up, the most important thing of all is really the whole thing about affection and about having happiness. And that's not exactly the kind of environment that supports a lot of activity, or certainly not a lot of affection, and not a lot of comfort either. So, and there's another one. You know, how does that kid sit there, you know, and just sort of smile and look at these things? Anyway, and it's not that comfortable to sit on your child. Nor, in these kinds of places, you have to bring your own seat or you just give up. But when you get it right, you know, and you have these chairs, look, he's got, I think, 4 chairs. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's pretty good, right? And then this, look at that. Everyone's enjoying this. And then this, you see affection. When you feel comfortable, there's affection. And that's really, it's really what we're all about, if we can. Or this is in Laguna Beach. These are 3 generations all giggling on a bench that was given by someone in that community. And they're sitting on it. That's priceless. That's as good as it gets. Until you get this. Now I know I'm prepared when I get to be 80 years old. I am absolutely going to be necking on benches in great places. That's going to be what I'm going to go do. Because that is such a precious thing. And the best place in the world, the best public space in the world is Paris Plage, which is for 1 month in the summertime in Paris, is just out of sight. And everyone should do this in their own way, because it'll transform a city and redefine a city around a public space. And you could do this along the waterfront, because they did it in Paris. But this is City Hall, okay? Now, you know, City Hall, and what do they do in front of City Hall? Well, they put sand and volleyball courts. That's pretty good, right? Well, not only do they do that, but then they have, these are the public seating. So, and then what they do is they close the highway along the Seine, and they put out this beach, the Paris Plage. And so this is public seating now. Remember, this is public. What they do is that they say, for 1 month in the summertime, we will bring the Riviera to Paris. And so they do. Now, what's so funny about this is that on a sunny day, all the people who sunbathe come out, and on a cloudy day, all the people that don't want sun come out and use it. So it's not used when it's cloudy. It's used as much when it's cloudy as when it's sunny. And so they have these cafes, and they have a mister when it gets hot. They have boulet, and they have other games, the climbing wall. You can get a massage there. So it's a pretty special place. And they just do it, they make it. So you could do that here in San Diego and make a major statement that would redefine the whole idea of public spaces for the city. And you could do that, I think, on the waterfront. So these are principles that we have done a book called How to Turn a Place Around. The community is the expert. You're creating a place, not just a design. Design is very overrated, but it's actually more important when you're creating a place than when you're just doing a design statement. So it requires more skills on the part of a designer. So it actually, a designer has to take more responsibility and more involvement in creating a good place, because there's many more dimensions to design that you can't do it alone. Yogi Berra says if they say it can't be done, it doesn't always work out that way. So this is the traffic engineer, and if they say they can't do it, we do have a doctor up in Santa Barbara who does frontal lobotomies, and they do work, because he did one. You can see a lot just by observing. You can have a placemaking vision. Form supports function instead of, design and function alone. The power of 10, which we talked about in triangulation, start with petunias, and that's the Paris plage is a petunia. Money's not the issue. If it is, you have the wrong project. And finally, you're never finished. So, in conclusion, good places breed healthy activity. That's absolutely true. People attract people attract people. That when you focus on place, you do everything different. That's a fundamental shift away from what we've been doing. It takes many disciplines and skills to create a place. It takes a place to create a community and a community to create a place. We talked a little bit about amenities and how they make a place comfortable. And then this thing is you can't know what you're going to end up with. It means you're free to be able to experiment and grow a place and be spontaneous about what can come into it. And each place has its own identity, absolutely. And then you can't have anything less than excellence. It's as important as having a good home is having a good community place for people to gather in and make connections. And we don't think of that. We've taken the idea of the public realm out of our lives, and it's not important as it needs to be. And then you need 1 million zealous nuts. Now I know there are a lot here, but you need a lot more. And if you breed zealous nuts in the community, and these are people that create greatness, and I know there's a lot in this. There's some right here. I can see them all right here. They're amazing people, and that's what's going to make this community great. And that's what you need more of. So how do you breed zealous nuts? That's not an easy task, but it is absolutely fundamental, because you can't have anything less than excellence. It doesn't work to have mediocrity in a community. So that's the shift we have to get. We have to get back to the idea that this is one of the most fundamental needs, that we can create excellence in our schools by making them more diverse. We can create excellence in our churches by broadening who they appeal to and how they draw people in and how they do that. It just goes in every aspect of our life. We need to do that. So if we build our cities around happiness and community well-being, what an amazing goal. And why aren't we doing it? That's the question that I put out everywhere I go, because that is what we really need to be achieving. And so everything has to be a campaign. Creating zealous nuts is really about creating a campaign of excellence, having a vision, becoming communicators, searching for impediments, organizing teams, attack complacency, produce short-term wins, take on bigger challenges, and then connect change to the culture of the community. That's change. And you need to lead that change into every corner of every community. And so we have lots of resources. It's amazing what goes on out there. We look for those zealous nuts because they are the indicators of greatness in a community. So thank you. You have a great group of people here, and thank you very much.